Hello, and welcome to another of InsideBE webinars. This time with a special guest and a special lecture, which I'm particularly looking forward to. We'll talk about AI and technology, how all this can be linked with behavioral insights, and what this intriguing combination can bring to your brand. So good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, depends from where you're connecting. And please let us know where you're connecting from. Where do you come from, and what do you expect from this webinar? So last time, my colleague took my place, Christina, and she interviewed Rachel Altman from another behavioral consultancy, a really interesting webinar which you can find on InsideBE. And today my special guest will be Lea Karam. And a little bit about Lea. She did a master in strategic marketing at Imperial College London. She worked as a strategist in Dubai on clients like PepsiCo, Nestle, Johnson & Johnson, and many more. And right now, she is a strategy consultant and behavioral scientist at Behave. And she works with clients like TikTok, Financial Times, BritBox, Investec, and she'll tell us more about all that. So Lea, hi, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Hi, Matej. Thank you for having me, and thanks, everyone. I see there are people from Boston, Zurich. Hi, everyone.
Yes, we usually get a lot of people from all over the world, so welcome everybody. Lea, when we exchanged a couple of emails 2 weeks ago, you wrote, at Behave, we use a set of innovative behavioral technologies based on AI and machine learning, and then layered them together to get a strong understanding of consumers combined with our behavioral science expertise. Can you maybe explain in easier terms, what do you actually do at Behave?
Okay, yeah, that's actually my consultancy slang. So I'm going to try and simplify it. So essentially what we do and what we believe in at Behave is combining and layering a set of behavioral science technologies and expertise to actually really go granular onto human behavior. Because, you can't really understand and go to the core of what people really feel, when you just look at claim behavior and what they say. You need to really understand the whole process. And I'm going to show you a visual later on in the presentation that I really like, where you can actually see, a 360 degrees understanding of the consumer. So that's basically what we do. We look at the tone of voice. We look at the emotions that come up via facial coding. We look at what people say as well, but also the emotions that come up in people's sentences. So that's really important because it really helps you in understanding, okay, by looking at explicit behavior and implicit behavior, what can I really understand about human behavior? How can I actually get control over human irrationality? Because humans are really irrational. So that's basically what we do.
So what is a typical assignment you get from a client?
So it really does depend if it's a growth brief, if it's a perception brief, for example. So a typical assignment could be an example that I'm going to talk about from the Financial Times. So we help the Financial Times in the US in increasing their subscribers by 100,000. They wanted to understand how to go about that. To understand that, what we had to do is to really understand what drives people within separate professional segments, for example. We had to understand their affinities, and we use AI for that. I'm going to show you how we did that affinity scoring. What we also had to do is understand their for moments of frustrations. We did that obviously via a bespoke quantitative survey that we then overlaid with tonal analysis, where we actually understood, okay, that specific theme created that sort of, or actually made them feel that sort of way. What does that mean? Should we go further into that specific theme? So that could be, for example, one of the examples where it's an audience brief and we kind of need to grow a specific platform. Another example could be creative testing. So you want to build amazing branded cues. You want to build familiarity. How are you going to build familiarity if you don't really understand implicit behavior? Not just what people really tell you, which is explicit, but how do people actually feel? I'm going to show you the technology using biosensors like galvanic skin responses, which looks at people's sweats and gets their engagement from that. We actually look at people's emotions on their faces. So it's really important to do that, and obviously combine that with verbal responses to understand how am I going to actually get people's attention within that moment in time, and how can I actually engage them. So those are some examples of briefs, and obviously I'm going to dive further into each one of them throughout the presentation.
Now, this really sounds fascinating, and let me come back for just a second to the Financial Times example. So, what was actually the outcome of all this analysis? Was it personalized communication to the individual person coming to the subscription landing page, or was it general communication which you crafted based on all these insights that you gathered?
Yeah, so we actually built out product and comms recommendations, again, depending on the professional segments. An example that I'm going to talk about is the financial services segment. We actually saw a very interesting hidden opportunity, which is the fact that that specific segment was actually engaging a lot with a niche app that the FT had, which is called FT Alphaville. FT Alphaville is all about experts communication. It's all about getting information in real time. So we saw that there was a huge affinity around that specific app. So our recommendation was literally to develop this app, because we saw affinity with some other competitors, but the FT wasn't investing enough in that specific app that actually created a lot of interactions and involvement and interest. So they developed that app. But for example, for the tech segment, we saw that the tech segment actually wanted really quick, convenient financial advice because their financial acumen is not that strong. But the FT wanted to educate them. So actually what they did is kind of create a lighter app offerings with kind of nudges. We call them prompts, behavioral nudges with in-app notifications in real time that would give them advice on, for example, the latest in cryptocurrency, and simplify that information. So it was mainly a bit of more simple text. So for each of those segments, we actually recommended different approaches. For the consultancy segment, for professional services, which are consultants and lawyers, we saw that there was a huge community aspect. We saw that the shared identity was way more salient than the personal identity. So we recommended everything that was linked to a more community-focused approach, like, for example, a forum-based section in the app, or, for example, a testimonial. So it's about really going granular onto those segments to understand what works best. Is it a focus on product? Is it a focus on comms? And within those bits, also focusing on the right approach. And then you help them in growing their subscribers by 100,000. So.
Wow, that sounds really good. Well, so I won't be asking many more questions because this sounds so fascinating. Just a couple of words when it comes to how to ask questions and so on. So you can all see the live chat, I suppose. Please ask your questions there, and Lea will take them during the Q&A session. So if you think of something during her presentation, well, you can write it right away and we'll come back to it. Or even better, if you keep it for the Q&A session, which will come right after she's done talking. And I don't know, Lea, if you remember our first conversation, which was like maybe 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah, I do.
You know, I went on LinkedIn before the conversation to check you out, and I saw, okay, so it's she's probably not very experienced because she's a young girl. And then after the conversation, I was like, wow, I mean, this was awesome. And my colleague was there as well, and she was also like, what was this? She's awesome. So guys, Lea looks really awesome, and I mean professionally awesome. And I'm so much looking forward to listening to you. So I will now disappear. The floor is yours. Please share your presentation, your slides, and so looking forward to listening to you.
Sounds great. I already see great questions. There's a question about, I would like to know how to teach people that AI won't kill us. Don't worry. That's why I wanted to show how to effectively use AI, because AI has such a good use, especially in our industry. So yeah, hopefully I can try and answer that question. But yeah, I'm going to share my screen, and then if anyone has any other question, I'm more than happy to answer them after the presentation. Cool.
Perfect. The floor is yours now.
Thank you. All right. Can everyone see that? Okay. So I hope everyone can see that. So basically what I want to talk about is obviously the subject that we shared, which is how to effectively combine artificial intelligence with behavioral science to create value for your business. So I really wanted to talk about that subject because, again, there's a misconception on the use of AI. And it's important to note that AI can actually enable us to use some tools that would give us, or for example, that would augment the data that we already have. And that's what I want to talk about here, because we need to keep in mind that behavioral science is about understanding how we can kind of gain more control into human on kind of irrationality, if that makes sense, how to make them a bit more predictable. And I'm going to talk about it. So artificial intelligence really plays a big role in going more granular into this, which obviously I'm going to talk about. So before going into the details of it, I just wanted to talk about why behavioral science is so important, and I wanted to make it more relevant to us and our everyday lives. So why is behavioral science important? So we're humans. We procrastinate. We date the wrong people. We plan to lose weight, but we can't stick by a plan. We stay on bad contracts. We all stay on bad mobile contracts, bank contracts, broadband contracts. We think expensive things sometimes are better. We pay more for the same thing, although if you have a credit card or cash, we pay more if you have a credit card, because sometimes it's about the tangibility of it. We're irrational humans. We're afraid to incur losses, for example, compared to gaining something a bit bigger. So at the end of the day, we're humans. We're not rational. We're driven by emotional instinctive factors. So that's very important to keep in mind. And that's why AI plays a big role in really understanding what drive implicit behavior. So I wanted to put this out there because, only 53% of decisions actually reflect our intentions, which is why understanding human behavior is essential, but also why to understand human behavior, we need to do more than ask questions. This is really important. We need to do more than just get claimed answers from people. We need to do more. We need to understand how they say it, why they say it, what actually drives them. And behavioral science plays a big role in that, from heuristics to biases to applying different nudges. So this is what we call the intention action gap. So is there a way to actually bridge that intention action gap? Behavioral science is the answer, and combined with artificial intelligence, it's actually augmented, which is what I'm going to talk through. So again, there's this intention action gap, which means that we need to understand the unsaid. So how are we going to understand the unsaid? And how can we understand the unsaid if humans are really irrational? Actually, what we do and what we found out in behavioral science is that humans are predictably irrational. We can gain control over that. We can create the right nudges. We can actually deploy tools to actually make them feel a bit more predictable. So we can actually develop that and get closer to actual human behavior if we use the right technology. Again, combined with smart thinking and adding in our behavioral lenses. So I'm going to talk about our behavioral toolkit, and obviously there's not one truth for everything. It's based on the challenge, it's based on the objective, but I'm just going to show you a couple of examples that I hope will show you how you can add further value to your business and develop that technology, or actually embrace that technology alongside understanding your audience. So basically that toolkit is all about combining artificial intelligence with behavioral expertise to get a 360 degrees view on your consumers. And I spoke about it with Matej. That's the slide that I wanted to show you, because what we actually do is we look at how people think, what they say, what they see, what they hear, how they feel, and what they do. It's basically a 360 degrees view. So to be able to do that, it's important, again, to tap into context and heuristics and biases. But what's even more important, or what's even fundamental to do here, is to actually understand, okay, are there actual ways to understand emotions? Are there actual ways to quantify implicit behavior? Are there actual ways to actually understand the insights that come out from a tone of voice? So that's where artificial intelligence comes in. And I hope that I'll show you things that you've maybe seen before, but things that could add value to your, either you could be a marketer, you could be a salesperson, but I hope that this could show you that we can get even closer to understanding human irrationality, because adopting tech is basically the next step in doing so. So I'm going to talk first about visual AI and biometrics. Again, that's something that fascinates me. And when I work on those projects with clients, we always really find really interesting insights that actually drive conversion, that drive more interest in the brand, that actually drive more positive sentiment around the brand. So visual AI and biometrics has basically two strands. One is adopting a visual AI algorithm that has historic learnings around the human eye and how it's drawn to shapes, colors, text, and understanding the attention on that and the areas of interest. The other bit, which is also really interesting, is actually doing that through real life human participants. What we actually do is we adopt technology like biosensors, as I mentioned, galvanic skin response that measures the sweat, or for example, facial coding, which looks at people's emotions, if they frown, if they're happy, if they're surprised. And that's really interesting because it could really give you interesting implicit insights to get closer to what drives people, because we're merely driven by our rationale, we're mainly driven by our feelings. The second bit I want to talk about is tonal analysis. So it's great to know what people tell us. It's great to know, okay, someone thinks about us that way, or someone thinks about the market or our competitors or themselves that way. But how do they actually feel when they talk about it? I mentioned it for the Financial Times, but in this presentation, I'm going to talk about an example with TikTok, which I think was really interesting for the app's growth. The third example I'm going to talk about is actually audience segmentation. So through natural language understanding, we can actually reveal hidden opportunities that exist within segments. So that's what I talked about when I mentioned the Financial Times. That's what I talked about when I said that we can actually look at affinity scoring by analyzing millions of conversations to understand, okay, what are the core segments that actually exist in real life interactions? And I think that that's fascinating, because that could basically help you in better segmenting your audience and your market. And you can overlay that with panel data. You can overlay that with the expertise that you already have. But that's basically using AI to better understand what clusters within the market. The fourth one, which is what we keep developing, which is one of my favorite parts as well, is actually deep diving into discourse, deep diving into sentences, deep diving into text. So by doing that, it means that we can look at the emotions that come up in specific, again, in millions of conversations, because we're humans at the end of the day. If we look at millions of data points, we're not able to process that really quickly. But what a machine can do, what technology can do, and at a great confidence level in 2021, what it can do is it can put those topics and themes together, show us the emotions within those topics and themes and how intense they are, to give us an understanding around what the audience really cares about. And then another bit, which also comes from discourse analysis, is personality analysis, personality nudges, personality profiling. By looking at the sentence structure, tone of voice, the topics they engage with, the way they talk, the way they actually talk, we can actually build out personality profiles. And I'm going to show you how. And obviously, if you have more questions, then I can answer them after the presentation. I know that's a really interesting slide, but this is just to show you visual AI and biometrics. I'm going to start with that section. What you see on the right is galvanic skin response. Again, it measures sweat. which means engagement. So the more you sweat, the more engaged you are. And basically some color cues sometimes, create that in specific people, something that's really contrastful, interesting. Sometimes, and you're going to see that in the example, creates a lot of peaks in galvanic skin response. And then in the middle, what you see is facial coding. So it's basically what type of emotion comes up. Sometimes when we get galvanic skin response with surprise, that's an amazing peak. But sometimes when that doesn't happen, that's a bit worrying, because sometimes, people drop off. And the one on the left is actually eye tracking. This is used in both visual AI, the algorithmic one, and by recruiting real-life participants. And I'm going to show you examples of that. So again, really quickly, just for your knowledge, on the right, we've got visual AI, which is an algorithm. It's a machine learning applied on the asset, on the creative, on a website prototype that has historic learnings around how the human eye is drawn to shapes, colors, and faces to give you a quick win, a quick understanding that has a big impact on your communication. And on the right, you can see the emotion graphs below. So that's biometrics. That's actually getting real life participants, connecting them with the machine. And via artificial intelligence, you'll get facial coding and you'll get unconscious emotional responses. I'm going to show you how that actually works practically. So actually, this works in a way to give you more insights onto implicit behavior. It's great to understand color psychology. It's great to understand the behavioral nudges that you need to apply onto specific comms or assets or your website. But when you combine that further with biosensors, with click mapping, with attention maps, you improve the user journey, engagement, and clicks further. That's an example that we did with Investec that was really, really successful, and it's going to be a case study that I'm going to publish on the InsideBE website. So I'll keep you posted. But as you can see on the top left, that's the attention map that actually shows you where the eye actually clusters there. The one on the right is a bit better than the one on the left for now, because you can see that the attention is focused on the specific title and a couple of call to actions, whilst the one on the left, the attention is really split. So people won't really focus on the important elements across the page. You can quantify that further and look at areas of interest. For example, here we can see again on the right that call to actions are in green. They're way more effective than the ones on the left. So that's a quick win. That's a recommendation that you could do based on AI. Bringing that a step further, we can create user click maps where you actually connect with the machine and people attempt to click on specific sections. That's where you understand moments of frustrations, because 20 attempted clicks means that you need to make that section clickable so people would be able to have a smoother user journey. You could see where they focus on and what actually creates more interest. And then this one, using biosensors, actually shows you galvanic skin responses. So we saw that contrastful boxes like that, colorful boxes, are way more kind of get people a bit more engaged, and people attempted to click on that box more than 25 times, which meant that Investec had to make that box and all those colorful areas clickable to be able to have a smoother user journey. Without that implicit behavior testing, we wouldn't be able to know that. We'll just understand their verbal opinion, we'll see what they mean, but we wouldn't be able to have aggregated attention maps, aggregated areas of interest, user click maps, and biosensors. That's why it's really important to combine implicit with explicit behavior. This is just a quick example to show you that it's not just about conversion, so making sure that the call to action is there and the user journey is smooth. It's also about building the right branded cues. So that's an example with this Estée Lauder, where we saw that basically we know in behavioral science, usually the eye is drawn to people's faces and also, bigger, bolded text. So we saw that the Estée Lauder logo was basically not that visible. So how are we, even if it's an established brand, how are you going to build familiarity? And how are people going to remember that Kendall Jenner is actually partnering with Estée Lauder? So it's really important to make sure that the logo is a bit more salient. in a similar fashion, we look at design metrics like cognitive demand and clarity. Cognitive demand typically has to be below 20%. Otherwise, the user feels a bit overwhelmed in the first 2 seconds. The clarity score typically has to be above 80% because you need to make sure that it's a bit smoother. So it's important to rebuild that and build the right cues to make sure that the ad is more effective, as effective as possible, to tap into the subconscious. So we can use those techniques to actually create kind of quick wins for bigger impact. Now, we can also do that obviously with video content, and that's, for example, some like creative testing that we did for TikTok, where we revealed the moments of truth in a specific creative. As you can see here, you can see the peaks in galvanic skin response at some points in time with their respective emotions. This meant that the areas with the great elements of surprise had a lot of engagement, but there are other busy areas where users were dropping off. A specific area of the video actually created some anger. So it was about understanding, okay, implicitly, what are the emotions that are coming up in people's subconscious, and how can we actually tap into that to create better comms? So again, the importance of artificial intelligence. I just wanted to show you this because Ed Sheeran is not always the answer. Celebrities are not always the answer. Getting those macro influencers are not always the answers. So when we did this, an explicit test, an explicit focus group, we saw that people wanted mainstream content on TikTok. The more the celebrities on there, the more they're going to be on there and all of that. But when we did implicit testing, we saw the opposite. We actually saw that people were way more engaged when it's someone they don't know, maybe UGC content, but there were surprising tricks and tips and great content within there. So it was important to make sure that the TikTok didn't really focus on all of their efforts on getting those celebrities on the app, but they also created great content, great challenges, great tips and tricks with things that people never really saw before. And that's what TikTok did. Obviously, I can talk about that case study further, but I just wanted to say that that explicit behavior doesn't give you the whole story. Now, moving into tonal analysis, it's great to understand visually what's great, to build the right cues and understand what drives people, but we need to know that more than a third of emotions is actually communicated through tone. As you can see here, 38%. So layering tone further with other sort of implicit techniques would give you even further insight. So why leave that type of valuable insights behind when it could actually give you something really actionable for your business? The same way that you could build a really interesting creative that has the right branded cues or is actually more conversion focused, the same way goes for the tone of voice, in the sense that when people tell you something, sometimes it doesn't tell the full story. You can feel more anticipation in their voice, or you can feel more indifference. So that's why it's important to also launch that through tonal analysis, especially that audio is more and more important at the moment. So that's the methodology for tonal analysis. I'm going to go really quickly. You take kind of acoustic signals in people's voices rather than specific words, and then you analyze what is kind of not what is said, but how it is said, the way that they communicate, and which emotions are displayed. A very actionable learning from that was, again, TikTok. And I think that was extremely important because when we actually did some interviews with TikTok creators, the emerging creators said that they didn't really care about monetization. They cared about discoverability. So, it's okay, it's important to get reach, it's important to grow, and monetization, no, was not important to them. But obviously, that's not the full story. So what we did is we then ran that through tonal analysis, and we kind of look at what they said and how they said it when they talked about monetization. And we saw a huge peak in anticipation, and we saw a strong tone of voice. We saw that they were not indifferent. They were indifferent with several other topics, more than 10 other topics. But when it came to monetization, there were actually peaks. So what that led to then is actually subtle monetization activities, even for emerging creators in Germany. And the next quarter, creator satisfaction just skyrocketed. So it's important to layer those tools together to understand what really drives people. And tonal analysis is going to be increasingly important, because especially in focus groups and interviews, especially when someone from the branded team is there, people don't tell the full story. So now I'm going to move into the other section, which is natural language understanding segmentation. So using AI to understand the segments that cluster within your audience. Now, starting this part, it's going to be more text focused, more discourse focused. We looked at visual cues. We then looked at tone. Now we're going to look at text. So using artificial intelligence, this is a machine learning technology, we can actually look at what audience brackets exist within real world interaction that, without machine learning or artificial intelligence, those would be impossible to pinpoint to. So I mentioned that example when we had the discussion with Matej. What we start by doing is collecting that audience. So what we could do is we could collect that audience based on their biography, based on their interest, based on the types of people they follow, their content consumption. But for the FT specifically, what we did is we took their CRM database. We only took out the financial services segment. We took those email addresses, enriched those email addresses with their social handles, so with their social footprints, and then enriched those social footprints with historic social data. So that was really interesting, because we were able to look at the database specifically and connect that with their real world interactions. That's the result. So what the technology then does, it analyzes millions of data points. So it looks at millions of data points within historic social data to give you the key segments that cluster around that full audience. As you can see here, we saw that startup founder and venture capital, risk and compliance, entrepreneurship, board member, and senior finance officer were the core segments that clustered around the FT's financial services database in San Francisco. And that was extremely interesting, because the technology takes the interactions, the content consumptions, who they talk to, who they follow, how they talk about it, and then gives you the top priority segments that actually come out within that database. So again, we revealed those audience segments, and what we did after is we wanted to understand who they were talking to further, who they were following, what were the positive interactions. Remember, that's the CRM data. So we took just those email addresses and were able to link it with historic social data. So what we then found out is what I mentioned about FT Alphaville. FT Alphaville scored really high. They kept interacting with it, but the FT wasn't investing in FT Alphaville. And the audience was also interested in competitors like MarketWatch and New York Times Dealbook. So the recommendation here was to develop the product, for product development. And what they actually did is they invested in FT Alphaville. And that's because we used artificial intelligence and machine learning to unveil what actually clusters within that historic social data, and also who really interacts with specific people and entities. That's just to show you that we then built an audience profile, again, bringing behavioral science in, bringing consumer insights in. Then after actually building out those segments, we looked into their demographics, attitudes, psychographics, publishers. But I'm showing you that just to get to the next slide, to then show you how, once we saw that, okay, the goal is to develop FT Alphaville, how we applied behavioral nudges to develop that app. So we looked at that audience, we looked at the financial services audience in San Francisco. We saw that those 4 elements were really important to get them to download the app. One, dopamine, those chemical reactions in your brain that would get them to download it. So dopamine could be increase through using the right colors. That's when we actually did some UX as well, to getting the right experts and columnists that would actually excite them. And the second bit is change. We saw that whenever they change jobs, or whenever there's a major event happening in their lives, that's when they seek something new. So we made sure that we were actually in context, and we were actually there when we needed to be there as FT Alphaville. The third one is default. So as a financial services expert, as a professional financial let's say investment banker or hedge fund professional, you need to have that app downloaded. It's part of your identity to have that app downloaded. The fourth one is pressure, networking events, actually having that app because of social pressures and expectations to cultivate your financial acumen further. So developing that light app offering with those four behavioral nudges was great, because what we did is we unveiled the opportunity with FT Alphaville using AI, and then we used behavioral science and our behavioral nudges to push that further. Now, the last part that I'm going to talk about is discourse analysis. Again, that's one of my favorite sections, because discourse analysis enables you to find what people actually care about by actually understanding the emotions and sentiments within text and sentences. And the beauty of it is that it analyzes millions of data points. Or again, we can't really look at that much data and actually see, okay, what's important, what's the opportunity. What the AI does, what the technology does, is it takes all of that data and looks at what consumers really care about. So I'm going to go really quick in terms of the methodology. Again, I mentioned it. It's millions of conversations that are processed through an algorithm which uses natural language understanding to then cluster those all that text into key themes with respective emotions. So for example, there's a specific brand that wants to track their audience. Their audience is talking about a specific topic. There are millions of conversations, or maybe hundreds of conversations around a specific topic. How do you know what they care about? What that technology does is it groups the key themes based on the volume, and then it looks at the emotion that comes up. So is it joy? Is it anger? Or even the sentiment? Is it positive? Is it negative? And then it looks at the intensity of it. Okay, but how intense is that sentiment? So that enables you to then build that SWOT specifically to understand, okay, what are people actually saying about me, or what people are actually saying about our competition or about our events. So that's an example that we did for one of our clients' competitors. So we work with Pala Skateboards, and their top competitor is Supreme. So we wanted to understand, okay, what does this fashion streetwear audience say about Supreme? How are we going to understand that? By looking at millions of conversations around Supreme. So you plug that text into that technology. It enables you to understand the positive themes around Supreme, the negative themes around Supreme, and how intense those are. The more intense it is, which is here, for example, on the top right, the more it's a strength. The less intense it is, which is on the bottom right, it's an opportunity. And as you can see here on the bottom left, it's more of a threat, and on the top left, it's more of a weakness because it's embedded. What we care about for competition is their weaknesses. As you can see here, we saw that there was a lot of negative discourse around Supreme and their kind of non-transparency and non kind of respect sometimes of the environment. We saw that there were a lot of complaints about Supreme not using sustainable products, sustainable produce, sustainable t-shirts, which was a great opportunity for Para Skateboards, because what we did after is they upweighed a campaign that focused on Para sustainability's offerings. So based on understanding those millions of conversations and using that technology to understand, okay, what is really important in that conversation, we were able to get Palace to a specific direction where they upweighed and communicated more around their sustainable offering, which was a great result. So again, the importance of understanding the emotions that come up in that discourse. I hope that doesn't scare you, but that's really, really interesting. And I'm going to just talk about it because TikTok was looking to partner with Antedek's Saturday Night Takeaway. So what we did then is, obviously, you look at, with the TikTok community, if that's an opportunity or not. What we wanted to do is we wanted to really understand, okay, is it going to be good for TikTok to partner with them? What's the emotion that comes up when they talk about Antedek? So what we did is we dived into the TikTok community, into their conversations around Antedek, and we saw the emotions that came out when they talk about Antedek. In general, as you can see here, it's way more positive than negative. However, there are more low activation emotions, as you can see: interest, not really admiration or trust, more of an acceptance and interest sort of way. But at that point in time, we thought that, okay, you know what, that might be a good opportunity for TikTok to partner with AntaDec. The sentiment's fine, and TikTok can help in cultivating more trust as well. So it might be a win-win situation. But then what we did is, once obviously there were changes, there are external factors that actually change how people feel about things, so we need to keep that in mind. So what we did is, once we spotted that opportunity, we created a time series analysis that you can see at the bottom. So what we did is, we then tracked that opportunity with AntaDec in specific moments in time. As you can see on the bottom right, the sentiment completely dropped in January. That's because of AntaDec's shows special that people didn't enjoy. There was a lot of backlash around it. So it was not a good idea to partner with AntaDec in that point in time. Again, that's why it's extremely important to make sure that you leverage discourse analysis, the emotions that come up, because that technology is constantly evolving. That technology is at a very high confidence level. So doing that enables you to actually understand, okay, what are the sentiment and emotion? What's the sentiment? What are the emotions that come out? But also, how do those evolve with time? That's something that I always recommend clients to do as well. It's great to look at the emotions that come up in conversations, but what you can also do is, you can leverage that technology to understand that the emotions that come up in your brand's communication, in your brand's content. So that's an example. I'm going to go a bit quicker here, that we did for HSF, where we scraped the content across all of the different consulting and law firms that I wanted to look at, to understand the emotions that come up when they talk and how they talk to talent. So again, we can see that the low activation emotions are a bit higher here. That's to keep a professional tone of voice. But then we saw that HSF provided way more vigilance and communicated a bit more vigilance than the rest, as you can see on the left. That's because of their problem-solving aspect. That's why we encourage them and we help them and to be a bit more solution seeking, to use a bit more of like a more positive teams, if that makes sense. And we kind of saw the same with some competitors, where, for example, in Qatar's, they're very low in anticipation. They're very high in anticipation when they were talking about their graduate programs, which was great. But we saw that Slaughter and May were not that excited. So it was an opportunity for HSF to also upweight their kind of anticipative tone of voice. So it's also important to use that and kind of launch that technology when you want to look at your own content and your own tone of voice. Again, you can do that to understand consumers. You can do that to understand your brand. A very interesting way to also understand that and emotions is to look at press. We're humans. We can't look at millions of articles in the press at the same time. But what the technology can do is, it can actually take wherever you're mentioned in the press, wherever your sector is mentioned in the press, a specific keyword is mentioned in the press, and look at those articles, look at the sentiment that comes up through specific publishers, to understand what's pushed at the audience and how you can upweigh your PR, for example. So again, sentiment and emotional analysis is really important to embrace at the moment, because it's constantly evolving, and you can scrape text to understand what comes up. You can understand the core emotions that they're actually coming up with in specific sentences. Could it be in consumer conversations? Could it be in your own brand content, or in the press in general? Now, the last section I want to talk about is the personality analysis. We launched that a lot of times with our clients and saw great results, because the more you mirror your audience, the better your results. So what we do is, we analyze the structure, tone of voice, emotions, topics within conversations to determine the personality profile of an audience. So we do that based on the 5 ocean personality traits, which are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, and then the sub facets for each, as I'm going to show you in the upcoming slides. Why is that important? Because again, our personalities drive who we are. The jobs that we choose, our health behavior, our vocational interests, the degrees we choose, our relationship behavior. So personalities is basically who we are, and understanding how to leverage AI to actually get the personality traits and understand the personality traits of your audience to shape your tone of voice is extremely important. So those are examples of personality nudges for impact or brand building. So if, for example, there's a low score and a high score in openness to experience from your audience, that means that they're curious and independent. So you need to you need to shape your communication in that way. If there's low extroversion, they're a bit more introverted, quiet, reserved. That's how you need to shape your comms and copy, for example. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. But it's important to keep in mind that personality traits and building out your tone of voice based on your personality traits is extremely important. And we've seen that with our clients with increased conversion, increased clicks, but there were different studies as well that were launched that shows that the more you mirror your audience based on personalities, the more successful your comms will be. And AI actually enables to really understand the personality of the audience. So that's, for example, the personality traits that we ran for one of our clients and their audience. So as you can see in blue, that's the personality trait based on the 5-ocean model of the audience, of the social media followers, for example. You can see that they're very high in openness to experience, and that's really important because they want to try a new product, they want innovation, but also they're score very high in self-efficacy. So they think that their decisions are the right decisions. So they want brands that can trust in actually making them sure that, yeah, maybe that's the right decision for me. But when you look at Skrill's personality, you can see that they score really low on trust. There are not a lot of trust cues that come up in their communication. So it was really important to kind of upweigh that and make sure that that matches the audience. So an example of that, I wanted to give you a few ideas around how you could match color and copy based on personality traits. But an audience with high openness to experience wants more, bold colors like orange, for example, or colors that are brighter. So make sure that whenever you've got an audience that's high in openness to experience, imagination, innovation, that you use those types of colors. That also you change the background color based on the different bright colors that come through, and use words like open up, change, upgrade, uncovered, for example, to reflect that openness to experience. Now, an audience with high self-efficacy, again, like they want brands they can trust in making the right decision. We found out, and we know in behavioral science, and we found that through A/B test as well, that dark blue evokes a stronger sense of trust than lighter blue. So use those types of colors when you want to communicate something specific, because our eyes could connect with colors, and there are literally specific chemicals that come out when we look at specific colors. In a similar fashion, when you use green for high risk purchases, that reassures people, that gives out a sense of calmness. So those are really quick wins for big impact. But to be able to do that brings you a step further, because in those 2 seconds, if you're able to get your consumers' attention, you actually win. And those are really big wins that you can have if you actually apply that. Big quick wins for for small changes. Again, the personality differs based on the audience. That's an example of the cryptocurrency audience. I just wanted to show that because they score really low in neuroticism, whilst the average person in the UK, for example, scores above 50% in neuroticism. So the fact that they score really, really, really low means that they're really prone to do high-risk purchases, obviously, because they're in a high-risk trading and in investment sector, which means that Skrill has to be bolder with them, has to challenge the status quo. And so when they shape communication to that audience, it needs to be a bit different than their average consumer. Finally, onto my last slides before the questions, I just wanted to show you how we applied personality nudges for BritBox to be able to increase, for example, their free trial. So what we did is we ran the personality traits of the two shows that they were about to launch. So the fans of the two shows that they were about to launch, we saw that the Vera audience scored highly, like really high in neuroticism, like extremely high, whilst the Doctor Who audience scored extremely low in extroversion. They were really introverted. So what we did is we shaped the copy based on that. So for Vera, we said, who says mysteries can be solved? Find out for yourself, etc., etc. And then for Doctor Who, we said, escape to another universe, lose yourself. And those were the most impactful copies that we launched, because we understood the type of person that watches those shows, what they expect, who they are, or the majority of people within those audiences, and then we mirrored their expectations. We did the same for Slack. So Slack, when Slack was actually launching, they wanted to understand how they had to talk to the decision makers in specific companies. But what we found out is the people that actually adopt Slack and in those specific companies, they shouldn't be classified by their job titles or business classifications. They should actually be classified by their personality traits. So what we did is we targeted them based on personality traits and targeted different comms depending on what they wanted to achieve using Slack based on their personality traits. And that created a 9% increase in awareness and a 300% uplift in click-through rates. So again, the importance of using artificial intelligence to shape a comprehensive understanding of your audience, to then feed that into communication and brand building. So that's just a summary. I can talk it through in the Q&A, but this is just to show you that adopting AI will literally enhance your existing strategy. It shouldn't be seen as something that you do separately. It should be seen as something that you embrace in conjunction with understanding human behavior, because you have that data, or you can launch that data, but then what you could do thanks to artificial intelligence is you can understand what people can verbally articulate. So what they feel may be really different to what they say. So again, what aren't they saying? You can get that from visual AI, biometrics, tonal analysis. You can get that by understanding their gut emotions, by looking at galvanic skin responses, for example. So that's extremely important to do. And again, personality analysis as well, emotional analysis based on the millions of data points that exist in the market and across consumers. What do people actually care about? So it's about launching that technology to basically go even more granular into how people feel based on what they say, what they do, what they hear, what they think.
Wow, Lea, I'm pretty impressed.
I tried to be a
Thanks,
bit quicker.
thanks a lot for this amazing presentation. And well, I have a lot of questions. I'll take the liberty to ask at least a couple, and then we'll give space to the audience. Let me just close my window. Okay, there we go. So first of all these technologies that you talked about, do you own all of those as company Behave, or do you outsource, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both. The majority of them we're building in-house because we've got our own data engineering team and data scientists, and some other ones we work with partners really closely. So we help them in developing them as well, understanding based on our applied consultancy projects what they actually need and how they can improve them. So it's basically a combination of both.
Interesting. You talked about in this last section about personality profiles.
Yeah.
And you said that basically what you do is that you determine a personality profile of the entire audience. So it basically means that you're not really crafting specific communication to individuals, but you try to understand the features, the personality features of an entire group of people. Did I get it correctly?
Yes, because the more you go granular, the more not ethical sometimes it could be. So what we do is the important part, obviously, which is the segmentation part that I didn't mention here, which is basically the behavioral science and consumer insights part that feeds then into artificial intelligence, is extremely important. You need to segment your audience, understand who they are, what drives them, and once you've got that audience pack and audience profile, that's when you build a personality trait. How are they different depending on other groups? So with the financial sector, we see them obviously being a bit more conscientious, being more structured, orderly. With our TikTok pop music audience, they were so impulsive. It was very, very different. And obviously, sometimes we go even more granular onto sub-segments and sub-segments within sub-segments, but we never really do it on an individual level.
And I guess it's much more practical to do it on large audiences rather than, so granular, and
Yeah.
because then it becomes quite messy, I suppose.
Yeah, there's one thing we have to remember though, like it's really important to layer insights together. So whenever you look at personality traits and understand the personality of the audience, you need to also look at what they care about, what they say. So personality traits, you can do that, you can launch that as part of something else. It's nice to do if it's just for quick comms and quick wins, but personality is good when you're building an audience pack, an audience profile, and you enrich that using artificial intelligence and to get those personality profiles. And I think a very interesting bit that's important to keep in mind when it comes to AI is that I talked about the FT and how we had their CRM data. So that really enables you to actually understand the personality profiles of people within that CRM data, because you're enriching those people within that database with their social handles. Then you get their historic social data, which you can then run through the software and get their personality traits.
Wow. Just for you guys listening and watching, my colleagues are now posting in chat LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the links where you can follow Lea. So make sure to follow her, because obviously she has a lot to say. Okay, so this is really interesting, and well, I have a couple more questions, but can you give an example of you talked about Slack and how you design different comms based on the different kind of personality traits that you found out. Can you maybe give an example from the top of your mind how those couple of communications differed?
Yeah, of course. So do you want the Slack example or in general?
Well, I mean, if you can do the Slack example, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. So for Slack, for example, it's important to keep in mind that at the start, it was looking at decision makers within those companies. But then it wouldn't, when we looked at the audience and we looked at the data, it didn't really make sense to segment them by looking at, oh, okay, you're in that type of sector, you're in that type of sector, in that type of sector. It made way more sense to see, okay, Slack is in its early phase. Who is going to adopt Slack? Who's the type of person that's going to adopt Slack? So what we did is we took a step back. We scraped the conversation of current Slack users to see, okay, what's the personality traits? How do they speak? What drives them? What do they score really highly on? And then based on that, we then targeted kind of specific groups of people. Because when we looked at Slack users specifically, it really enabled us to see the person that actually adopted us as a brand previously, who they actually are. So what we did is we then targeted people using our partners, so GNA. We targeted those people based on personality traits. But then what was really interesting with Slack is that as Slack was evolving, and that's a different case study as well, because it was growing so much, there were different segments that were coming up. So there were other people that were not those innovators, so people that came after that wanted to adapt that. That's when we created another personality profile to target those people, because they were a bit behind in adopting it. We wanted to reassure them, so we showed them some testimonials as well. So it's really all about, again, understanding that audience, going to the core of them, like going at the core of them, and really shaping communication based on how they would respond to you, but also their pain points. And to get their pain points, you can use that technology. You can actually deploy some AI to scrape texts and get the emotions and understand what they don't like about your brand, what they like about competitors, or, for example, what are the expectations in that specific industry.
Mm-hmm. Lea, and so how do you go about layering all
Yeah.
these insights? Because I can imagine, coming up with some insights individually for each technology, but how to combine it together, I have no clue.
That's basically, so every example I showed you, most of the time that has a layered approach. That's that's what we do as Behave. We layer insights. So we layer insights for commercial growth. So we don't just use personality as a standalone. Often we don't use emotional analysis as a standalone. We use, let's say, qual and quant research. We overlay that with tonal analysis. We do ethnography research, observational research. Then we overlay that with social listening and tracking to get a full image around that audience. So sometimes it could be a quick project. We want to understand who that audience is, what drives them. Okay, for TikTok, for example, they wanted to partner with Gamescom in Germany. So we looked at how TikTok gamers in Germany felt about Gamescom, and we saw their conversations, and we saw that there was a lot of frustration when they talked about waiting in the queue for such a long time. So many conversations around that, so much negative sentiment. So TikTok actually did a very interesting event, like a very interesting how do we say it, experience there while people were waiting in the queue. So that's important because you can do quick wins, but if you want to really grow as a brand, you should do like TikTok did in general with us, or the Financial Times, or Investec. Layer those insights together to actually get to the core of your consumers, and obviously overlay that with our understanding of behavioral science, so behavioral nudges, heuristics, how you can actually prompt behavior change. Again, artificial intelligence and behavioral science, I might be really biased, but I believe is the sweet spot.
Well, I think so, and even more after your talk. But let's now
Good.
go to our audience's question. So, where do you get visuals and biometrics data from, avoiding being too intrusive?
So, you mean the creatives? Oh, people?
Well, I think you guys. So when you look for data, when you get the biometric data and visuals and so on, how do you go about it? Or is there
Oh,
ever a
yeah.
concern of being maybe too intrusive? And
Okay, so with the visual AI, obviously it's an algorithm, but then when it comes to biometrics, that's basically people need to sign. So when you recruit participants, you need to make sure that people are happy and people sign that their data is going to be given, etc., etc. So with Investec, we recruited high net worth individuals, and obviously they had to sign that they were happy with the content being shared,
Mhm,
etc., etc. And most of the time we don't share them. So that's why I talk about actually in general we really don't share them. That's why I talk about aggregated learnings, aggregated click maps, aggregated attention maps, because that's how it's strong when you look at
mhm,
their actual aggregated behavior together as a segment, as an audience. So yeah, it's basically aggregated learning, putting people in behavioral tribes, behavioral
mhm,
audiences.
mhm. Okay, so here's another question. For brand analysis to discover the emotional factors based on Twitter data, what would be your suggestion from the methodology perspective?
Okay, so it really depends on the source of your data. I found that the best data could be from taking first party data, enriching that with social handles, then enriching that with historic social data to kind of understand what they say about your brand specifically, because those are people within your database. But if not, and in-house APIs, if there's a capability to build an in-house API that could scrape the Twitter conversations, that's also great. But just make sure that whenever you look at your brand, that again you define your audience first. You know who you want to analyze. You want to know what what they might say, and then you look into it, because again, you can't really understand their perception of your brand without understanding who that audience is, because a lot of audience think differently. That's why with Supreme, what we did first is we looked at general conversations around Supreme, but when we kind of filtered that by the streetwear community, that's where the insight is very robust, because that's actually how they feel about Supreme. So you could actually get from from a specific Twitter API the conversations that are happening. But if you have more questions on that, it's more technical. I can get into it, but yeah.
I would encourage everybody to reach out to Lea
Yeah.
and engage in detailed conversations. Here, Rodrigo is asking, what differentiates your use of innovative data sources and AI from what your competitors do?
Yeah, so that's again what we love doing, layering tools together, because we have so many. We don't just have this one here and that one there and that one here. We layer all of them together to build out a strong understanding of consumers. And also because we built out our in-house capabilities and we built out specific of offerings and services based on that, then that differentiates us from others, because we understand what people say, how they feel, what they do, and layering that together. So layering AI with ethnography, for example, with observational research, with other explicit techniques. That's where our expertise comes from. We have behavioral scientists, we have researchers, we have the data engineers. So we keep on developing that AI in-house, but we also develop the service behind that AI. What are the actionable insights that you get? We don't just give you, oh, look, this is that. We build out a story and we give out consultancy based on that. So I think that's where we differentiate, how we layer those together, but also the consultancy that we give.
Because this is what we see quite often, and that's that you have many companies giving you insights from the data, insights
Exactly.
on the behavior, but they don't tell you what to do with it.
Exactly.
And this is what the companies are mostly interested in. At the end of the day, they don't really care about the insights. They care about the solutions which bring results. And so
Exactly.
if you're able to do this in-house, doing both parts, I think that's a huge added value.
Yes,
Um,
definitely that.
and okay, so here we have a couple more questions. I'll just take one. Um, which sources of data do you use for discourse analysis?
It really depends again, because discourse is a big word, so there's not like one truth to it. Discourse can come from blogs or forums if it's a B2B brief, for example. Discourse can come from Twitter. Discourse can come from surveys. Sometimes we take in the open-ended responses in a survey and look at the top themes that are actually coming up. Discourse can come from, as I showed you, a specific comms or website page. So again, the focus could be on social blogs, forums. It could also be on surveys. It could also be on comms and creatives. So it really depends. But I think our main focus comes from, let's say, Twitter, forums, blogs, and we overlay that with panel data. We overlay that with other types of research. But again, but I hope that you saw the importance of using those tools and artificial intelligence to get there, because basically once you get that source of data, if you're able to apply that, and know obviously by using your own knowledge, and we're humans, the human intelligence is important, and using that gives you more results than if you were to just ask someone what they think or how they feel about something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely amazing and fascinating, because very often we feel exactly what you're saying, that the classical methods of market research, for
Yes,
example, are simply not enough, and you have to go
exactly.
a bit deeper, actually much deeper, to uncover what's really driving people. Guys, still many of you watching the webinar, and if you want to hear more from Lea, please follow her on Twitter, on LinkedIn, wherever. She will be publishing interesting case studies on InsideBE alongside 34 other experts. And so my second to last message is please go to the URL that my colleagues will post in the chat window, because there's a special offer of 30 days free trial of InsideBE, where you can read all the case studies, you can watch all the courses for free, try it out and see if you like it. Lea, thanks so much for being here. It was amazing. I loved it, and I'll definitely be in touch soon regarding the thing I mentioned before. We won't
Yes.
reveal what it is. It will be very interesting. Looking forward to being in touch with you again, and looking forward to having you on InsideBE and in our webinars again. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you
All
for
the
having me,
best.
Matej. Thanks, everyone.
Absolute pleasure. Take good care. Have a good evening, all
You
of you
too.
guys. Bye bye.
Bye.